Hey everybody, welcome to the Reader Willow Homeschool channel. Today is the second reading in my study guide series for Plutarch's Life of Cato the Younger. And in today's reading, we're going to learn about how Cato disciplined himself in the practice of virtue. So, a couple of interesting stories in here. Plutarch writes, after Cato obtained the priesthood of Apollo, he changed his residence, and taking his portion of the paternal property, which portion was 120 talents, he contracted his style of living still further, and making his companion of Antipater of Tyrus a Stoic, he attached himself mainly to ethical and political studies, occupying himself with every virtue as if he were possessed by some divine influence, but above all, that part of the beautiful which consists in steady adherence to justice and in inflexibility towards partiality or favor was his great delight. He disciplined himself also in the kind of speaking which works upon numbers, considering that, as in a great state, so in a political philosophy, there should be nurtured with it something of the contentious quality. Yet he did not practice his exercise in company with others, nor did anyone hear him when he was declaiming, but to one of his companions who observed, "Men find fault, Cato, with your silence," he replied, "I only hope they may not find fault with my life, but I will begin to speak when I'm not going to say something that it were better left unsaid." The basilica called Portia was a censorial dedication of the old Cato. Now, as the tribunes were accustomed to a basilica is like a large public building, and the old Cato is the guy as opposed to the younger Cato, which is the one we're looking at, Cato's ancestor. So the basilica called Portia was a censorial dedication of the old Cato. Now, as the tribunes were accustomed to transact business here, and there was a pillar which was considered to be in the way of their seats, they resolved to take it away or to remove it to another spot. This was the first occasion that brought Cato into the Forum. The Forum is a marketplace where people met and discussed things. And against his will, for he opposed the tribunes, and he gained admiration by this sample of his eloquence and elevated character. His speech contained nothing juvenile or artificial, but it was straightforward, full to overflowing, and rough. However, there was diffused over the roughness of the sentiments a charm which led the ear, and his own character intermingled with it, and gave it the dignity of his address a certain pleasingness and placidity that were not ill calculated to win men's favor. His voice was loud and powerful enough to reach to so large a multitude, and it had a strength and tone which could neither be broken nor tired, for he often spoke for a whole day without being wearied. On this occasion he got the better in the matter in dispute, and then again wrapped himself up in silence and his discipline. He used to harden his body by vigorous exercises, training himself to endure both heat and snow with uncovered head, and to walk along the roads in all seasons without a vehicle. His friends, who used to accompany him on his journeys, employed horses, and Cato would often go side by side with them, each of them in turns, and talk to them, himself walking while they rode. He showed in his complaints also wonderful endurance and self-denial, for when he had a fever, he would spend the day quite alone without permitting anyone to approach him, until he felt certain relief and the disease was going away. At entertainments, he used to cast lots for the parts, and if he failed, and his friends urged him to begin first, he would say that it was not right to do so against the will of Venus. And at first he would get up from supper after drinking once, but in course of time he stuck to drinking more than anybody, so that he often continued over his wine till daybreak. His friend said that the cause of this was the administration in public affairs, in which Cato, being engaged all day and hindered from literary pursuits, associated with philosophers during the night and over his cups. He said as he drank from his cup. At night over his cups. This is just coffee though. Accordingly, when Memmius observed in company that Cato was intoxicated all night long, Cicero rejoined, "But you do not say that he also plays at dice all day long." Altogether, Cato thought that he ought to walk a course the opposite to the then modes of life and usages, which he considered to be bad and to require a great change. And observing that a purple dress of deep bright was much in fashion, he himself wore the dark. He would go in public without shoes and tunic after dinner, not seeking for reputation by the strangeness of the practice, but habituating himself to be ashamed only of what was shameful, and to despise everything else as indifferent. The inheritance of his cousin, Cato, of the value of 100 talents having been added to his property, he turned it into money, and let any of his friends make use of it who needed, without paying interest. Some also pledged to the treasury both lands and slaves of his, which Cato himself offered for this purpose and confirmed the pledge. All right, so that's the reading. And now for the questions. First question, I want to focus on a particular quote from the reading. So this is the quote. He attached himself mainly to ethical and political studies, occupying himself with every virtue as if he were possessed by some divine influence. But above all, that part of the beautiful which consists in steady adherence to justice and in inflexibility towards partiality or favor was his greatest delight. So that's the quote. And here's the question about the quote that I want us to consider, because I think that sort of captures the spirit of this particular reading. The question is, what do you think Plutarch means when he says that part of the beautiful in the quotation above, the question I just read to you? What is the beautiful? So the beautiful in question here, I think, is it's certainly a moral quality. So we're talking about moral beauty. And the ancient Greeks and then the Romans after them had the idea that there were, and they get this from Plato, that there are these absolute moral beauties, these ideas that exist. They're objective, and they're ideas that exist in the mind of God, and everyone has access to these ideas. So, and I believe this is true. I believe God made every human being with an intuitive sense on a very basic level of what's beautiful and what's good in this moral sense. So, for instance, everybody knows that courage is beautiful, and everybody is ashamed of cowardice. We all know kindness is good, cruelty is wrong. We all have everyone with a healthy moral faculty has access to this kind of knowledge. Even people who don't have access to the Bible, all of us, since we're made in the image of God, we know these things, at least on this general level. And the ancient Greeks and the Romans recognized that this is really the heart of everything that is beautiful, right? So, moral beauty is the foundation of all beauty, and this exists as an idea eternally in the mind of God, and that is what Cato seems to have devoted his entire life to, is attempting in his own life to reproduce that moral beauty, which is eternal and which is objective. So it says here, he occupying himself with every virtue as if he were possessed by some divine influence. So this is the cool thing about Cato. I think he recognized that this is really the heart of our purpose in life, and he dedicated himself to this as if he were, possessed by some divine influence. But it says in particular the things that he exemplified in terms of his moral conduct was steady adherence to justice and inflexibility towards partiality. So remember, we were talking about I'll put a link to the cardinal virtues, but he's devoted to the idea of these virtues, but in particular, he's devoted to justice. and doing what's right, no matter what the pressure, one way or the other, to veer from that is. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I like the idea too that these ancient Greeks, even though they didn't have access to the Bible or the special revelation that we get in the Bible, they had the general revelation from God that we all have an intuitive sense of what's good and beautiful, and Cato devoted himself to that sort of beauty. The other question is, Cato was most famous. I say Cato is most famous for his justice, but in this reading we also have examples of his temperance, which is another of the four cardinal virtues, temperance. Can you recall some? So if you think back to the reading here, there were examples of his. First of all, he's devoted himself to this, making his companion Antipater of Tyrus a Stoic. Stoics, today we use that word in English, like if somebody is stoic, that means that they could hit their thumb with a hammer and they just, okay. They don't scream, they don't holler, they don't, say bad words. A Stoic is someone who endures, the way we use the word now, is someone who endures pain without complaining and whining about it. But we get that word from the fact that this was a school of philosophy among the ancient Greeks. And in that school of philosophy, you trained yourself to act upon reason and rationality and not to be jerked around here and there by your emotions or by the sensations that you're feeling at a particular moment. So that obviously is something that would appeal to a guy like Cato. And exercising temperance, which is, where you don't overindulge in things that are pleasant, even if the thing itself is nothing really wrong with it, like eating a meal that you like. Well, if you're a temperate person, you will eat just until you're satisfied, and then you'll stop. You won't just keep eating because you like the taste of the food. That's what temperance is. So he practiced this on several occasions. He even does this. So when he gets sick, for instance, he doesn't just, oh yeah, I need somebody to take care of me, or that kind of thing. He doesn't do that. He just locks himself away, and then as soon as he starts feeling himself better, then he'll see people again. Another example was how he dresses. It says he would go in public without shoes, which nothing wrong with that, but it would look different. Just imagine going into work at the office with no shoes. And if it's the sort of office that has a coat and tie, just going in there in a t-shirt or something. So that's what he did. And it says, according to Plutarch, he would go in public without shoes and without tunic after dinner, not seeking for reputation by the strangeness of the practice. So he's not just trying to stand out as a weirdo. He says, but habituating himself to be ashamed only of what was shameful and to despise everything else as indifferent. So he doesn't overindulge in the way he dresses. He tries to condition his mind not to care what people think about the way he looks. He doesn't seek, for sympathy's sake when he's sick. These are different ways that he exercises this. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to point this out. This doesn't really have anything to do with his temperance, but good gracious, did you notice? So in the ancient world, it was a very highly prized skill to be able to speak in public to public audiences, live in front of you that could react. That was considered a very great skill, necessary skill for a citizen to have. And it still is a great skill for a citizen to have today. It's always useful. So it was developed, and he put a lot of thought. You can tell Cato put a lot of thought into how to be a public speaker, and Plutarch, as a person from that same, roughly the same period in the classical world, he has a nice sort of critique of the style that Cato had. But did you notice that Cato says he spoke for a whole day without being wearied? Ah, that's a long time to speak without being weary. Just imagine that. So anyway, that was a nice little insight also into his. It's not. It's also not just that it's his personality to be talking all the time. It was intentional for some purpose that he would speak that way, because it says when he got the better of the matter in dispute, he again wrapped himself up in silence and his discipline. So it wasn't like he was just a talker, just gabbled on and on. He talked for a purpose, but when he talked, it could go on as long as it needed to go on. So also, it says he hardened his body with vigorous exercises, going out in the heat and the snow without a hat on and everything. So this is giving you some more insight into the nature of Cato's personality and his obsession with shaping himself into the best kind of person he can be by devoting himself to the pursuit of virtue at the cost of everything else. Personal, the way people think about him, the way he looks, the way he feels at any given moment in time. So I hope you like that. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.